Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, Ambassador Wolfgang Ischinger.
Good morning, everybody. This is a wonderful opportunity to continue our discussion about the future of NATO, the future of the alliance, and I'm extremely pleased to have a group of wonderful panelists. I'll start with, on my right here, Senator Jeanne Shaheen from New Hampshire. And then we have Senator Thom Tillis from North Carolina. And on the European side of the this place here, we have President Paolo Alli, who is an Italian member of parliament and who is currently the president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So welcome to all of you. Let's give them a hand. And thanks for making it possible, because I know the two of you just stepped off an airplane a couple of hours ago. This is an important moment. We've just all been told that, contrary to expectations after the NATO leaders' dinner last night, which seemed to be, which seems to have been rather harmonious, there is now, I'm hearing, yet another sense of a crisis moment over in the summit, where apparently the leaders are now meeting again to discuss the famous issue of defense expenditures, I assume. So, you know, Senator, I've been asked many times over these last weeks and months by my fellow Germans, if we have such fundamental problems with the United States, do we really need this link? Can we not go it alone? And I kept saying, on the basis of my own experience, having served in the United States, knowing a little bit about NATO, I think the right way for us, if we have a problem with the White House, let's talk to the senators. And if we find that there are other problems, we can maybe also talk to governors and to members of the House of Representatives and to civil society and to so many others who have something to say about where America wants to go. So let me start this discussion by inviting you to tell us what you think. What NATO means to you, what it should mean to the United States, and where we want to go together. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, and it's very nice to be here with all of you. Senator Tillis and I will stay awake for this panel, anyway.
I have the coffee.
Yes, we have coffee. You know, there is broad public support in the United States for NATO. There is broad support in Congress for NATO. Senator Tillis and I restarted something called the Senate NATO Observer Group, which was formed in the late 90s to address enlargement when we were looking at enlargement of NATO, and we needed to shepherd a number of bills through the Congress to address enlargement in the United States. And that was very effective. And as we look at the new challenges facing NATO, as we look at the potential for further countries to join in the future, we thought it was really important to restart that group and to show very strongly that the Senate is in support of NATO, that Congress is in support of NATO, and we arrive here with two pieces of legislation, one that passed the Senate 97-2, an amendment to our defense authorization bill that supports NATO and endorses our Article 5 commitment as part of NATO, as well as legislation that passed the Foreign Relations Committee, on which I said 20-1. It has not yet gone through the full Senate, but I expect it to have the same kind of support that the other amendment did. And we appreciate the importance that NATO has been to national security in the United States. We understand that we are stronger with allies working together than we are alone. We very much appreciate the fact that the only time Article 5 has been invoked was after the United States was attacked on 9/11. So we have seen what a difference it makes to have our NATO allies come in and support our efforts. I was just in the Middle East, in Syria and Iraq, and in Baghdad sat at the table with our military leadership and representatives from France and from Canada talking about the effort in Iraq to support the progress there, the democratic principles I saw firsthand, security that has come as the result of our efforts there. So the work that we're doing with NATO is very real. I've seen it firsthand. I know what a difference it makes. So we are here to bring that message to everyone that we understand how important this is and how much we need to make sure that we continue our strong alliance and our relationship going forward.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate the fact that you in the Senate have expressed in very, very strong terms the support for the alliance and for the idea of alliance. So let me turn to you, Senator. Why is it so hard for us to present to the public what I think deserves to be presented as a success story? You know, as a European, my country is also a member of the European Union. In the European Union, we have currently a member that wants to leave. We talk about Brexit. In the North Atlantic Alliance, not only do we not have a country that wants to leave, we have a long list of countries that are lining up to join. And we've just yesterday adopted, I mean, our leaders have adopted in the declaration the decision that we will be inviting yet another country called, in the future, North Macedonia, to join this alliance. So it's a success story. We're actually strong, we're respected all over the place. Tell us what we should be doing better, or how we should be doing it.
Well, I had a boss, I was a partner at Price Waterhouse, and I had this boss that really was a great personal developer. And every year I would have his opportunity to, he'd give me an opportunity to coach me. He'd say the same thing, just keep doing what you're doing. That's what we need to be doing with NATO. NATO alliance is strong. And I've got to speak from North Carolina. North Carolina is the home of the Global Response Force and the 82nd Airborne. It's the home of the Marines. Nearly half of all Marines are stationed out of North Carolina. It's the home of JSOC. It's the home of over 1 million veterans, a state with 10 million people, 1 million veterans. And I'll guarantee you, every single one of them have a story to talk about where they stood alongside a NATO ally in the service of their country. I also want to thank the countries that honored their commitment after 9/11. And we have NATO allies, and the American people know this. Over 1,000 of our NATO allies died helping us in the aftermath of 9/11. We don't forget that. I was on the Senate floor yesterday before we left. We had votes. And I had a number of people come up to me and say, I hear you're going to Brussels, and I want to tell you how important that is. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt in the commitment of the U.S. Congress to NATO. We're doing an extraordinary job. We have an extraordinary history. We have a product that other people want to buy, as does Macedonia and a number of others. So we don't need to worry about what we need to do to improve. We always need to improve. We always need to get better and more efficient. But make no mistake about it, the American people understand NATO, they embrace NATO, the Congress embraces NATO. You needn't worry about the future of the American commitment and the appreciation of the NATO members in this alliance. It's the most important military alliance that's ever existed. And I'm very proud to be here and very proud to tell you all that you have Congress on a bipartisan basis. We have your backs.
Thank you very much, Senator, for these comments, and they're very encouraging. But let me push you a little further on that. You are a Republican senator. And what happens to your voters in your state if they hear on television, the newspaper, that your president is talking about NATO partners being delinquent, that they're ripping off the United States? Isn't that going to create among also your voter base the sense that maybe NATO isn't really good for us? Maybe we should go our own, do it on our own rather than alliance-wise? How poisonous is this, and what will be the long-term consequences?
Well, I was talking with a youth group yesterday, and I was telling them to please be independent and examine the facts and at least click 1 point beyond a 140-character tweet. I mean, do your homework, and if you do your homework, you'll see that that's not really a crisis in the United States. I spent a lot of time in my state traveling around. I did last week, speaking with people. A concern about NATO never comes up, ever. Look, we're talking about a state where 1 out of every 10 people you meet have served in the military, and every single one of them have a story. I should also tell you I need to thank Germany, because in the 82nd Airborne, we have to drop out of planes about 10,000 soldiers a month to meet our readiness requirement. And there was a time when there was a group of C-130s that were scheduled to come in, U.S. C-130s that were scheduled to come in. They couldn't make it. It happened to be that we had German planes on the ground at Pope Army Airfield at Fort Bragg. They offered to do it. Now, we can talk about burden sharing, but I'm pretty sure that that sort of support's not included in burden sharing. Of course, we all need to increase our investment in NATO. And the reason for that is so that we can be the most prepared and that we can keep our men and women safe when we have to execute, and hopefully we don't. But I think that we need to be very clear that social media and headlines are not a reflection of the American public. They are not a reflection of the American Congress, and that's all you need to be concerned with. What we need to do is continue to make it better, but make no mistake about it. This is sort of like, I will tell you too, I read recently a medical report about life expectancy. And a person is much more likely to live longer if they have a great family base and they have a number of good friendships. I, for one, think nations will live much longer. The family of nations in NATO, our partners, who are our friends, are critical to the longevity of all of our countries. And I believe the American people get that. This is not a stump speech. I don't know if you do this in other nations, but we call it stump speeches. That's when you're in the political season, you're running out and you're doing the applause line. There is no applause line for "we need to get out of NATO." It just doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense. And it doesn't resonate with the American people. It certainly doesn't resonate with anybody that's served in any line of service in the United States.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. Before I turn to President Alli, let me warn you that after President Alli's remarks, we will open this up to your questions and comments. So please indicate to me when you want to speak. There are already a couple that I've seen here, around here. Now we want to hear a European parliamentary view. President Alli, as I said earlier, is a member of the Italian Parliament. He comes from northern Italy, from the area of Milano. And he is currently the president of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, which brings together parliamentarians from all NATO countries. President Alli.
Yes, we bring together parliamentarians not only from NATO member countries, but also from partner countries like Ukraine, Georgia, and more than 30 other countries. So our debates are really very interesting because in our Parliamentary Assembly, we have represented both the majorities and the opposition of each parliament. So we always have a very open dialogue. From the point of view of Europe, which is minoritarian in this debate, we see that, of course, we have still a lot of problems as Europeans. We still are not the United States of Europe. We are looking for a political union, which is far from becoming true. We are discussing since a couple of years about the new common defense system for Europe, which is, of course, must be synergic with NATO because we have NATO. But the point is that we have lived for 70 years under the security umbrella of the United States. And this is reflected also in the topic of burden sharing. So we recognize that the request from the United States leaders to increase the investments on security is real. We must comply with that. But the point is that the role of parliamentarians, the role of parliament, here it comes very important because we have to convince our parliaments and our public opinion that spending money for security and defense is an investment for our future. Unfortunately, this is not so clear in the media, in the normal, how to say, debate on communication system on the web, because you are wasting money, is not necessary, some idea that peace is for granted and security is for granted. So we have to work also on the education and communication about what NATO is and what NATO does, because unfortunately NATO is not well known, particularly in the countries which are in NATO since a long time. NATO perception is much better from newcomers or aspirants countries. So I think that we have a great job to do on several points. There is no doubt that for Europe, NATO matters, but I think that also for the United States, Europe matters. Europe has historically been a buffer towards East, toward the Middle East. Now it's a buffer, strong buffer towards the South, because facing threats coming from Africa, from sub-Saharan area, has Europe as a front line. I think that we are still buffers, but also potential bridges towards East and Far East. 70 years ago, we spoke about East and we only meant Soviet Union. Now we are speaking about East and we speak about Russia, China, in the next future India. Middle East, we know, the Arab world and Islamic world, and the southern Mediterranean border, which is more and more difficult to face, migration issues, all issues which are creating big troubles in Europe, in many European countries, including my own country, in Italy, with the populism, nationalism. And we have to face all these threats, but for sure, the unity of Europe is very important. And for sure, I think that nobody in Europe really thinks that we can make our own security without NATO.
Thank you very much, President Alli. As we turn to questions, please be kind enough to identify yourself when you ask your question. If you could ask only one question, make it brief. We want to hear as many voices from around the room as possible. And also, please tell us or tell the panel whether you want to raise a question addressing the entire panel or one of the members specifically. So we'll turn to the young gentleman right here, and then we'll go to the gentleman over there. And where was the lady that I saw in the... There, yes. You are number 3, so... Okay.
Thank you, sir. My name is Zafar Hashimi, and I'm speaking here today as a Millennium Fellow for the Atlantic Council. And I want to take a moment to say thank you to all those men and women serving across the globe so that we could have this discussion, especially in Afghanistan, where Afghan forces, together with US forces and NATO forces, are fighting against terrorism and for the values that we embrace to be partnered with the United States and Western countries. My specific question is that we partner with you, and we want to stay with you. And do we have, in the midst of this crisis or whatever you want to name it, do we have your commitment that you will help us take the ship to its final destination or no? Because failure in Afghanistan means failure for NATO, failure for the Western values, failure for democracy, and it will send a strong message to our friends and foes that partnering with West means consequences, bad consequences.
Great, thank you very much. We'll collect 3 and then go back to the panel. Gentleman over there.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much indeed. I'm representing Finland. My name is Ilkka Kanerva. previous foreign minister of Finland, and now chairing the Defense Committee in our parliament, and also chairing the Finnish delegation to the NATO PA. We very much welcome the declaration of yesterday. We have very, very strong commitment to the paragraphs, 79 paragraphs of that. And that's also extremely important for the partner countries like Finland. And we want to follow those guidelines in a very reliable way. My question goes to our transatlantic friends, saying that at the same time when we have, all of us here in Brussels, very strong commitment to the declaration, how is that on next Monday? What's your statement? Do we have your word so that also these guidelines will be alive on next Monday when those two big bosses have their own meeting between themselves? So it's a very important moment for everyone in here to hear your analysis on that issue, please.
Thank you. And the young lady over there.
Great to be young. I have to disagree with Senator Tillis on the question of perceptions. Perceptions change, and perceptions in America are changing very rapidly. Only in the last 2 years, there's 15% more Republicans that favor positively Vladimir Putin than there was in 2015 and 16. In the last 2 years, 25% less of Republican voters believe that Russia is a threat. And these perceptions change because of media. And my great belief is that they can change also on what NATO is and on what we all know here, the value that it brings to the American interest, to the security of American citizens, and to the, of course, security of Europe as a whole. So my question to you, a kind of challenge to you, is what will you do about it? Because tweets do matter, and people do listen to their leaders. And if we go on like this, sitting in rooms like here, where in a similar poll, everybody, of course, will be all favoring NATO, then I don't think NATO will exist in 10 years. And my general question to the entire panel, because it is a question, it's a panel about the future of NATO. Where will NATO be in 10 years? We have so many challenges. You, sir, said that maybe it's going to be enlarging forever, but I would challenge that also. I think there are member states that might no longer be member states of NATO within the foreseeable 5 years. So what is the future? And what do we do about it with our societies and in our societies?
I think at least one of those questions are for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think so. Why don't you start?
Yeah, the thing about polls, I spent a lot of time, I ran in a very contentious election, and there were polls that said that there was no way I could possibly win. So I only take polls as a reference point. They change over time. They change when you have a positive engagement. I, for one, do not trust Vladimir Putin. I don't trust his motives. I don't trust his incursions into Crimea. I don't trust his occupations in other nations. Frankly, the American people do not either. Now, a public opinion poll, depending upon how they ask the question, could make you think that there's a trend in a direction where the United States would embrace Russia. I don't see that among the American people. I certainly don't see that among the American Congress. So I think that's one very important point. I've been told I'm not supposed to plant myself. I almost planted myself. I turned my back to you all. So I don't think we need to, that's the problem with public policy today. We're so focused on some poll set at a point in time based on some interaction or some event, maybe a positive interaction with Russia and Syria, with the fight in the Middle East. I don't think I don't view that. I'm a data analytics person. That's what I did in my professional life up until 12 years ago. I don't see a trend towards a positive relationship with Russia until Russia ends its malign activities, and they are numerous. So on that point, I don't think you need to worry. We're always watching it, but I go back to my state, and there's nobody saying we just got to get more friendly with Russia. There are people talking about the relationship with NATO, particularly people who serve in armed services. I think NATO is going to be stronger 10 years from now. If we continue to build on the investment that we need to make, if we actually revisit how we even talk about the NATO members' investment, and the positive things that are counted beyond just a simple 2% number, then I feel very, very optimistic that NATO will be stronger 10 years from now, not weaker. There will be more NATO members, and I doubt seriously any NATO member would seriously consider withdrawing, certainly not the United States.
Senator Shaheen?
Well, I agree with that. And I also think if we look at what makes NATO relevant, it is security. And the threats to our collective security have increased over the last 10 years. They haven't gotten less. We're seeing threats to our cybersecurity. We're seeing the threat from Russia and aggression. We're seeing the threat from China in terms of its economic influence and what it's doing in the South China Sea. We're seeing a continued threat from terrorism. So the need to address those threats is not going to go away. And I think we will stay in Afghanistan. Just to be clear, there is support for that effort. And even though, you know, most of you know that we have three what we believe are co-equal branches of government in the United States, that the president submits a budget. His budget may have cut back in certain areas like support for Afghanistan and our engagements around the world, but Congress has put that money back in because we understand how important American leadership is in the world. And I think we also understand the threat from Russia and from Putin. You know, when the White House was talking about, in very favorable terms, about Vladimir Putin and refusing to acknowledge the Russian meddling in the US elections, what Congress did was to pass sanctions on Russia by, in the Senate, 97-2, and overwhelmingly in the entire Congress, because we understand we've got to hold them accountable for what they do. That's what NATO's trying to do, and that's not going to change in the near term. So I agree with Senator Tillis. I think NATO is going to be stronger in the next 10 years, not weaker.
Thank you. President Alli.
Just two considerations. First of all, I agree that the public opinion changes very quickly with the young lady there. I have a personal experience in Italy, in my country. It changes in one sense and in the other one. Look, we have a new government, a new majority in the Italian parliament, formed by two so-called populist parties. Okay? One of those, 1 year ago, presented in the parliament a proposal of law for Italy to exit NATO unilaterally. Now, the party is saying, we have always supported strongly NATO. So, the public opinion behind this party is changing completely its opinion about NATO and about defense. So, there is a world which is communication, a world which is reality. I think that also President Trump has this double-track approach. I think that we have to consider that the responsibility of the media is very big. The web is also a fantastic phenomenon, but has also some disadvantages, as we know. So I think that the reality, for example, I have visited as president of NATO PA several times the eastern countries from Eastern Europe or the Western Balkans, regions which are very delicate from the point of view of geopolitical balances and so on. And except Serbia, for historical reasons, the bombings of Belgrade in 1999, all people there, 90% of the people want to join NATO. I don't think that in NATO countries there is 90% people willing to quit, to leave NATO. So I'm optimistic, I share the opinion of the senators. And regarding Afghanistan, I also think that all our countries are strongly committed to support Afghanistan until the ship will enter a safe harbor. I should not tell that being Italian with what is happening with the closing of the Italian harbors for the migrants, but that's another story. Just a point. The example of Afghanistan gives me the opportunity to say something on the burden sharing. If you look at the list of countries which has supported different missions in Afghanistan, you see how many young people have been sent there by several countries, not only by the US, and how the real contribution from the countries is not directly comparable with the budget of their countries. So we always say in our assembly that the burden sharing must be measured in cash, capabilities, and real contribution. We have some countries in NATO spending more than 2% and sending not even one troop abroad.
If I may, just on the point of Afghanistan, first, we avoided what I think what would have been a mistake, and that was drawing down our presences there far too early. But I think the real key to the long-term success in Afghanistan is continuing to work and assist the Afghan forces in defending their homeland. But it's also to focus on the economic component. It's to make sure that we get the infrastructure in place. When I was in Afghanistan, I met with President Ghani, and he had a very impressive vision about infrastructure so that you're reaching out and building an infrastructure and an economy which needs to be moving while you're doing what you need to do to in terms of military operations. Economic operations are equally important. The two need to go together. And I think that's an area where NATO allies, if you take a look at other activities going on in areas where NATO forces are deployed, that there's an investment in there that goes outside of the military category that we have to look at when we're talking about our contributions. This is both military and economic. That total value of the relationship, I think, is something that we need to measure more closely.
All right. Now we go into our second round. I think we'll take maybe more than 3 because I have a long list of people who want to speak. Where? Yes, I saw that. Yeah, a huge number. I need to apologize to those. I can't possibly call on all of them. But let me start our second round of questions with a question of my own. Because I think that's an important question. One of my best European friends, great analytical mind, Ivan Krastev, who is from Bulgaria, he wrote yesterday that apparently the United States, meaning President Trump, isn't really interested in having allies. He is really looking at having fans or enemies. And the question that he raised, Ivan Krastev, in his brief think piece was, do we Europeans need to learn to live in a world where maybe the United States is no longer interested in allies? And what, if anything, would that mean? So I guess that's more a question to you, but also, of course, to the two senators. Now we'll go to the young man right in the first row, and then we will go to Lord Campbell, who sits way back and has been waiting for a long time.
Thank you, Ambassador. My question is for the two American senators. My name is Welton Chang. I'm a Millennium Fellow with the Atlantic Council, and I've actually coincidentally been a resident of both of your states, Hanover, New Hampshire, and Hope Mills, North Carolina. Although
I've been a resident of her state too.
There you go.
I didn't get to spend much time in Hope Mills because I was in Iraq for the entire surge, 15 months. My question is about U.S. refugee policy and an issue that's affecting two NATO member states greatly right now, Greece and Turkey. We just came back from a study tour in those two countries, and we've seen firsthand how much the migration crisis has affected those two countries. We visited a school for young refugees, and one of the teachers asked a question to them, basically asking where they wanted to end up. And some of them said the United States. Right now, we are on track, our country's on track to accept the fewest number of refugees in the last 38 years since the passage of the Refugee Act. So my question to you is, as committed members to NATO, what more can we do on this issue? And how do we achieve bipartisan consensus so that we can push our country to do more on this, considering our American values? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Lord Campbell.
My name is Mingus Campbell. I'm from the United Kingdom, and I'm a Vice President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. I was brought up to believe that it was Congress who's responsible to use checks and balances against the actions of the executive. And I'm very pleased to hear that in a very practical way you've been doing that in the Senate. But may I counterintuitively ask you not to let go the idea of how much the European nations spend on defence. Now, don't excuse my own country from this. We claim to spend 2%, but we add in things like pensions in order to get to that number. And the real issue is not the percentage, but the quality of what you spend. And I hope, therefore, that you will continue to tell us the importance of interoperability and the need, therefore, to ensure that we invest in high-quality equipment so that we can stand side by side when necessary with the United States.
Thank you, Ming. I think that's a very important comment. We'll go to the young lady in the back. Yes.
Alli, professor at Johns Hopkins University in DC. So a question for the two senators. The ambassador has noted that when you can't talk to the White House, then you turn to the senator. And I was wondering, from the part of European allies, how much of an evolution you've seen over the past 1.5 years in how they've engaged and sought to engage with you, with the Senate, and whether they've done so collectively or on an individual state-by-state basis. Thank you.
Okay, and then we'll go to the lady here, second row, yes.
Thank you very much. Kirsten Jongberg, I'm an official working for the European Parliament. I just wanted to get the panel's reaction to what's coming out of the summit right now, which has gone into an emergency meeting of allies only, following President Trump's threat to pull out of NATO if the allies don't commit to the spending increases. So A, wanted the reaction to that, but also your feeling on how much of a real issue that is. We've been talking a lot about public perceptions and how much this is a storm in a teacup versus a real sort of immediate issue.
All right. Thank you very much. There was one, the gentleman in the second row. You've been waiting for a long time.
Boy, somebody better be taking notes.
I was going to say, somebody needs to keep
Remember the
here.
questions.
Thank you very much for your kind presentation. I think that I am Federico Jeanne, former Assistant Director of International Military Staff and retired General of the Air Force of Spain. I think that many years we have learned that the transatlantic link is an important, very important issue on NATO. And it's something that we preach to everybody, that one of the assets of the alliance is that we have assured the transatlantic link. So I can tell you that if we see that the public opinion see that the leader of the most important country of the alliance is somehow not very much clearly in favor of this link and is treating some of the partners of in the alliance in not in a favorable way, I think that will damage very much our public opinion. Please, senators, what can you do to avoid the destruction of that important link? Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll take one last one, and then I'm going to ask Damon Wilson to read whatever is available in terms of report about last-minute developments over in the other less important room.
Thank you, Dr. Ischinger. My name is Vladimir Kozin. I am a commentator of the Russian MOD newspaper named Krasnaya Zvezda, or Red Star. I watched your conversation while sipping coffee. That's why I decided to intervene a little bit. Concerning annexation of Crimea, Russia never annexed Crimea. We reunited with Crimea. It was our territory from 1783.
But could you ask a question? Be kind enough to ask a question. We don't want any long presentations.
No comments.
Ask a
no
question.
Comments. So what kind of questions if auditorium is wooing? No questions. As to sanctions, no sanctions can produce negative impact upon us. It more produces negative impact upon Europe rather than the United States. So they are irrelevant. But please go ahead if you wish so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Damon, can you tell us something? And then we'll go back to the panel.
Just very briefly, I think we're still getting a lot of reports, but from what we've heard from various sources, is that the president didn't explicitly threaten to pull out from NATO, but he did use harsh words in the session, as we understand this morning, with the presidents of Ukraine and Georgia, saying that there would be grave consequences if allies failed to increase their defense spending immediately. So he brought, I think, quite a bit of a harsh tone, which provoked Secretary General Stoltenberg to ask to break up the meeting, to ask the partners to lead, including the EU, and go into an allies-only session on this fair burden-sharing issue. So I think we've seen pretty strong rhetoric about the grave consequences and an offhand remark that we're hearing about the U.S. could go it alone, but not an explicit threat to withdraw from NATO, as has been reported from as we understand it.
All right. But it means that we're still in a kind of, if this meeting is not over yet, we're still in a kind of uncertain crisis moment. So let's go to the panel. Let's start with Senator Shaheen and conclude with President Alli.
Well, one of the reasons that Senator Tillis and I are here is to express the support that the United States Senate has for NATO and for our collective security. So I appreciate the concerns that have arisen throughout Europe and in other parts of the world about some of the president's statements. I can't control those. But what I can do is bring the message of where Congress and the Senate are with respect to support for NATO. And that's why we're here. That's why we traveled all night, so we could be here to share with you our interest in maintaining the strength of NATO and our understanding of how important it is to the United States. So that's the first point. I want to go back. There were a number of questions, and I can't remember all of them, but I want to go back to the issue that you raised about refugees and migrants, because as anybody who's watched television knows, that's a huge issue, not just in Europe, but in the United States. I was in Europe in 2015, in Greece, and then in Germany at the start of the migrant crisis here. And I saw the tremendous generosity of so many people in Greece who didn't have much, who were trying to help refugees, the generosity of the Germans in taking in so many migrants who were fleeing, in the most cases, conflict. There are economic refugees, obviously, but so many people at that time were fleeing the conflicts in the Middle East and Afghanistan and in conflict in Africa. I believe the United States should be doing more to allow refugees in. I am very distressed by the policy that has made such news around the world of taking children away from families at our southern border. That is absolutely inconsistent with America's values, with our belief that we are a country of migrants. That's what has made us strong. And I totally renounce that policy, and I think most people, regardless of our political affiliation, feel like that's wrong, and that's why the president was forced to issue an executive order undoing the policy. But we need to do more. Ultimately, the only thing that's going to address this long term, and we're seeing worldwide that the number of immigrants, the number of refugees is increasing. The only thing that's going to change that is for us to help those countries that are in economic distress, the developing countries around the world, be able to get economic security. And we have, I think, for those of us who are in wealthier countries, that we have a responsibility to try and help do that and to help figure this out. So I know this is a challenge that you all continue to face in Europe. It's a challenge that we face in the United States as well.
Senator Tillis.
The point on interoperability, by the way, I offer my condolences on the World Cup events last night. Congratulations to Croatia. There are two things. Interoperability, I think, is a very important. The investment in quality is very important. But you also said something about interoperability that's also important to bring up. I'm very concerned with the NATO ally considering the purchase of a Russian missile defense system. That is just antithetical to the concept of NATO allies trying to increase interoperability, making sure that once you get in country, you're able to execute your mission successfully. With respect to the gentleman who commented on Russia, I couldn't disagree more with every word that he said. With respect to the gentleman on the refugee program, I'd like to point to work that Senator Shaheen has done on something that's very specific related to the Afghan interpreters. We're talking about people who have put themselves in harm's way alongside of American forces as interpreters, and that we would have any problem. They have to be vetted, for example, before they ever go alongside a special operator or someone else in country, they have to be vetted to begin with. They put their lives at risk. If they stay in that nation, they're most likely going to be killed or harmed. So that's clearly a case where we have to do more of that, and Senator Shaheen has led on that issue, and I've been very supportive of it. We need to address other issues. I was in Turkey at a Syrian refugee camp about 20 kilometers from the Syrian border. I want to applaud Turkey for the work that they've done. They've been on the forefront of trying to handle the refugee crisis, but we have to do more. All nations have to do more. Some of the other questions, to be honest with you, I'm a little bit foggy on. With respect to the events of today, again, ladies and gentlemen, the American Congress weighs in on all these matters. Unlike a Russia, where a leader can make a decision and execute it, we have co-equal branches that weigh into these matters, and decisions are not final until Congress has spoken.
Okay.
And we
Thank
leave the
you.
rest of the questions to our Italian colleague.
Exactly. And thanks for the reassuring point.
No, I think that the question were almost all for you, but I take just 2 points. First of all, on Russia, well, I was personally visiting the front line in Ukraine, and I see that the war is real. It's not a fake news. So, Crimea, well, but now the war is in Donbass. And people in Mariupol asked me, why does not NATO help and support us? And they don't understand the reasons because of Article 5 is not applicable to Ukraine. Of course, it's not possible. But I saw personally the situation there. And I was personally strongly attacked by the Russians for my positions in favor of Ukraine, myself and the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. So it's not a fake news that Russians use all the instruments, the tools they can, propaganda and weapons to get to their. So I think that Russia still remains a big problem. No, another point on refugee. I think that you have. You told you have something more to do in the US. In Europe, we have to invest a lot on the development of Africa. And in that sense, Europe is essential. I think that the United States must be interested in the role of Europe towards the development of Africa. The European Union invested in cooperation projects last year more than 50 billion euros in Africa. That's the way. Not only cooperation projects, but also economic development using our enterprises who are there. Because development is the real condition for peace. Take Nigeria. Nigeria has 200 million inhabitants. In 20 years, there will be 400 million. What are we talking about if we don't consider those issues? So I think that also security is connected to development in those regions. And NATO opened a hub for the South in Naples, in the NATO base in Naples. And the hub for the South has the goal of understanding the root of the phenomena which stay below migration, terrorism, and so on. And that's very important political indication by NATO of attention to the southern flank.
Thank you very much, President Alli. I'm afraid this concludes the session. I'm told that we're already in overtime. I apologize to all those who wanted to speak and didn't get a chance. Let's give a vote of thanks to our wonderful panel, Senator Shaheen, Senator Tillis, President Alli. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Senator, great. Thank you.
What?